يا زيني هم النسيم والليل بوال ظلامه له قمرة في سماء يا زيني هم النسيم والليل بوال ظلامه له قمرة في سماء يا زيني هم النسيم والليل بوال ظلامه.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وبعد. خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الحدي حدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We'd like to begin by praising Allah, and we praise Him and seek His help and ask for His forgiveness. And we seek refuge with Allah from the evil, from the evil of ourselves and from the evil consequence of our evil actions. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's not my usual habit to read from some notes, but today, due to the complexity of my talk and the subject matter, I'm going to have to mostly read from a text that I've written up. There are a few reasons why I chose Imam Shamil. He was a leader for 25 years of the Chechen and Dagestani resistance against Imperial Russia in the 1850s. The first reason the way I chose Imam Shamil was because when Ni'matullah phoned me about the conference, he told me it was going to be based around outstanding Muslim personalities. So Imam Shamil came to my mind. I've recently been doing a lot of reading about Chechnya ever since I was asked to become a supporter of the Save Chechnya campaign. And the first book I read was the epic work of Leslie Blanch called The Sabres of Paradise, Conquest and Vengeance in the Caucasus. It's a book just about as much as Tsarist Russia under Nicholas I as it is about Shamil, but her sympathies are with the Imam, even if it is with the Orientalists' view of him as the noble savage. But she also based her account largely of the Imam, that is, on the memoirs or the accounts written by one of the Imam's close followers, Muhammad Tahir of Karai. The second reason that I chose Imam Shamil was in no small part because he was a Sufi from the Naqshbandi Tariqa. In these days, when jihad has become synonymous with terrorism, Wahhabism and Salafists, some Sufis have unashamedly used this atmosphere of confusion and fear to lay all the blame for any violence at the Wahhabist door and to portray the Sufi path as entirely peaceful and pacifist. And the internal and spiritual jihad espoused by themselves as the only authentic and valid jihad. It seemed the perfect opportunity to remind them, ourselves and others, how short-sighted, shameless, and ultimately false such sectarian opportunism is. It certainly hasn't fooled the likes of Robert Spencer in his website Jihad Watch. Most of the great mujahids resisting European imperialism were Sufis. Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jazari, who was a Qadri, who actually met Imam Shamil on Hajj and discussed guerrilla warfare tactics with him. The Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, he fought the French for 10 years until the sheer brutality of the French army massacring civilians forced him to give in. Shah Waliullah in India, and of course in the last century Umar Mukhtar in Libya, all could be described as Sufis. Differences, I suspect, we will always have, but they should be kept between us. Whatever differences we have as Muslims, we can and must present to those who are ready to destroy us a united front. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah As-Saf, the meaning of which is, verily Allah loves those who fight in His cause in rows as if they were a solid structure. There is no doubt that this unity, presenting a solid structure, is one of the lost virtues. Imam Shamil understood the importance of unity, and it's one of the remarkable qualities of the Imam, how he was able to unite the dazzling mosaic of ethnic groups and rival clans of the Caucasus. More than 50 different languages are spoken in its towns and settlements. Although most of these groups and tribes are Muslim, even in the 19th century, the degree of actual practice was varied. Shamil knew that this unity was essential for the success of resistance, and that was helped at least in part by the sheer brutality of the Russian general Yermolov, whose name is still called out by Russian soldiers in Chechnya today to remind the Chechens of what they suffered then and will suffer now. Shamil combined diplomacy, maw'idha, Islamic encouragements, and harsh punishments for dissenters to maintain this unity. He made it clear that there would be and must be no talk of surrender to the Russians. Victory needed total commitment. Anyone dissenting would receive 100 lashes as punishment. In one famous incident, at a time when the Chechens were so hard-pressed fighting the Russians that they were on the point of surrender and could see no way or means to continue the fight, Shamil's mother was persuaded to approach him to encourage a compromise. But when he came to hear of this, his order was that anyone who even suggested surrender was to be lashed 100 times. The order was carried out on his own mother. But after only several lashes, Shamil threw himself across his mother and ordered that the rest of the lashes should be carried out on himself, and threatened death to the administrator of the punishment if the lashes were not hard enough. After this, he got up, after having been lashed 100 times or 90 something times. After this, he called out for those who had talked of surrender and thus caused such a punishment to befall his mother. You can imagine their terror at what punishment might befall them. But Imam Shamil said, "Return to your homes and depart in peace, and hold fast to the rope of Allah." There was no more talk of surrender after that. Shamil's Murids were known for fighting to the death, and even, it seemed, beyond. So here's a quotation from Leslie Blanch's book. She says, "They lay there," these are the Murids, "they laid there, mangled, pierced, and bled white. They drank the herbal buse, submitted to torturing treatments, and generally recovered. The Russians found them a most stubborn enemy. Killed, or so it seemed, they still survived. One Murid or holy warrior would rush out of a beleaguered aul, an aul is the name of their fortified villages. He would run out of a beleaguered aul, brandishing his shashka in one hand, which is a type of sword, a pistol in the other, and his kinjal, which is his dagger, in his teeth, and hurl himself on the astounded Russians, firing rapidly in all directions. Then dropping his gun, began to thrust and slash with his steel, so that 5 or 6 enemy were accounted for before he too fell. And even in the dying, he would usually contrive another deadly thrust. "They don't seem to know when they ought to die, sir," says a Russian soldier in Lermonov's Caucasian Tales. "Indeed, sir, these villains can hardly ever be killed. They are a people without the slightest idea of propriety." Shamil's struggle was part, in fact, of a longer ghazwat, as they called the jihad, that started, in fact, in the time of Catherine the Great, who invaded the Caucasus and was opposed by the forces of Sheikh Mansour. The fight was taken up by Qazi Mullah, who was a friend of Shamil. But Qazi Mullah's rebellion was ill-timed and short-lived. It all ended in the siege of the fortified mountain village of Rimri. 500 Marids against 10,000 Russians. Only 2 Marids escaped death, and one of them was Shamil. But it was in this escape that his legend was really born. And this is the account of one Russian soldier. "It was dark. By the light of the burning thatch, we saw a man standing in the doorway of Saklia, which stood on raised ground, or rather above us. This man, who was very tall and powerfully built, stood quite still, as if giving us time to take aim. Then suddenly, with the spring of a wild beast, he leapt clean over the heads of the very line of soldiers about to fire on him, and landing behind them, whirling his sword in his left hand, he cut down 3 of them, but was bayoneted by the 4th, the steel plunging deep into his chest. His face still extraordinary in its immobility. He seized the bayonet, pulled it out of his own flesh, and cut down the man, and with another superhuman leap, cleared the wall and vanished into the darkness. We were left absolutely dumbfounded. The whole business had taken perhaps a minute and a half." 2 things have always shocked me about many Muslims since I myself started to practice Islam. The first is how a Muslim could be illiterate when the first word revealed was Iqra, read. The second was how physically feeble and unfit so many Muslims are. I recall one of my early trips up north, meaning up north to the north of England, as a new Muslim, and being shocked when I heard that Muslim boys didn't play rugby because their parents considered it too rough. There is a truth in the saying that the British Empire was founded on the playing fields of its public schools. Physical toughness, strength, absence of luxurious living are virtues that should be present in every Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, "The strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer, while there is good in both." And Muslim collected it in his Sahih. Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan had the following to say about physical strength and its relation to our belief and actions. "The believer who is strong in his belief, body and actions is better than the weak believer, the one who has weak belief or a weak body or weak actions. That is because the strong believer is productive and accomplishes things for the Muslims, and thus they benefit from his physical strength, actions and strong belief. So this hadith is an encouragement to have strength, as Islam is the religion of strength, the religion of honor, the religion of prestige. So the strength that is sought from us in Islam is strength in belief and its tenets, as well as strength in our actions and our bodies, because all of this brings forth good things for the Muslims. The believer who has strong belief is more likely to be fit and in shape. This is because he understands the importance of striving and staying in shape in preparation for it. while the weak believer may easily get fat and out of shape from his overeating and laziness. Physical strength is a direct result of strength in belief. It is not to belittle the many excellent qualities of Imam Shamil, sure of himself, but without the physical stature to match it. In fact, it's said that Imam Shamil, as a child, was very, very sickly. In fact, originally he was called Ali, but it was the custom in that place that if a person or a child was sickly and ill, they sometimes thought it was a product of the evil eye. So they would change his name as a type of idea to try and divert the evil eye. I'm not saying that one should do that, that's what they used to do. So his name was changed. It was originally Ali and it was changed to Shamil. So he was a very sickly boy. But in fact, although he wasn't very physically strong when he was young, he was very, very self-assured, very proud. There's a story that his father used to drink alcohol. His father used to drink alcohol. And Shamil was so upset at the disgrace of his father being someone who drank alcohol that he told his father that if you do not stop, I will stab myself to death. And his father knew that he was capable of doing that because he was not someone who made a threat and didn't carry it through. And because he loved his son, he gave up drinking alcohol. So anyway, he was very sure of himself. You could say very self-assured, cocky as some people call it. And some young boys from his village took a dislike to this. So they gathered together, and what did they do? They stabbed him in the stomach. So a group of boys, they surrounded Shamil and stabbed him in the stomach and left him for dead. Returning to consciousness, Shamil's first instinct was to hide from both taunts and sympathy. He dragged himself to the mountains and he bound up his wounds and obtained these herbal remedies for which the mountain men were famous. And they used this system to treat wounds with herbs and stuff like that. Anyway, he talks about these and also use this. They have this ant in the mountains that they have these pincers, and they use that as a type of stitches. So they let the ant bite you, it brings the wound together, and then they bite off, they twist off the ant and leave its head to act as stitches. And this is actually how the wounds would be fixed. So the stoical young Shamil hid his wounds and his humiliation and did not return to Himri, his village, until he was not only recovered but toughened by an implacable, self-imposed regime of physical culture. From that moment on, he forced himself to feats of endurance, changing himself into a lean, iron-hard athlete. It reminds us of the saying here of the Prophet ﷺ that's been attributed to the Prophet: teach your children swimming, archery and horse riding. Shamil could outfight, outride, outswim and outrun all the rest of the mountain people. Just as they had their own methods for curing wounds, so they had their jealously guarded methods of training and hardening both themselves and their horses. To be able to cover the enormous distances and endure the violent changes of climate their raiding tactics and the country demanded. And likewise, these Caucasian braves tried themselves and trained themselves to have extraordinary stamina. They ate sparingly. I just want to mention as a side point, I've been asked actually a couple of times in the last month about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where, well, everyone knows this, when you eat a third of your stomach for food, a third for water, and leave a third for air. And this has been repeated so often that people actually think that it's sunnah to eat for a third of your stomach, and a third for liquid and a third for air. But this is actually only the last part of the hadith. The first part of the hadith actually says that enough for the son of Adam is a few morsels to keep his back straight. That's the first part of the hadith. The first part of the hadith tells us that we should not eat anything more than what we need to keep us alive. That's enough for us. But if a circumstance happens, like it's Eid or you go to a wedding, then the maximum you are allowed to fill your stomach is a third for food, a third for air, a third for water or liquid, and a third for air. But the norm for the Muslim should be that we eat enough food to keep our back straight, to keep ourselves going. That's enough for us. This is the correct eating habits of the Muslim. And so this is how they were. They ate sparingly and as a race. But the fighting men, they ate even less. And because of this, throughout all of the Caucasus, the wars in the Caucasus, the Caucasian wars, they were better able to withstand the rigors of long marches in barren country, unfettered by cumbersome supply wagons which hampered the Russian columns on the move and included such unmanageable objects as 5-foot brass samovars to hold 50 gallons of tea, without which the humblest recruit would have mutinied. I wonder which one describes us these days. Wine was forbidden, of course, and meat was a rarity at their tables. They didn't eat a lot of meat. And if it was meat, it was only lamb, goat, or chicken. Their physique was generally maintained on a few cakes of rough ground millet and a little goat's cheese. During a campaign, these strong people were often seen to eat and appear well nourished by a few leaves or even rhododendron flowers. They trained themselves to run great distances swiftly at level speed without panting by carrying a bullet or a pebble in their mouths. Their lives were a mixture of personal austerity and heroic excess. So Shamil followed this pattern until at 20 he was famous for his feats. And this is the type of things that he could do. He could sever the butt of a rifle with one blow of his dagger. He was once seen to cut a Cossack horseman almost to the saddle in one single cut. He could clear a 7-foot wall at a leap. He could jump over in one leap a 7-foot wall. And Shamil's horsemanship was remarkable. The mountaineers' equestrian acrobatics had the same brilliance as the Arabs. Perhaps it was a legacy of their Arab conquerors in the 8th century. At any rate, the Caucasian festivals of horsemanship and daring were similar and equal to the Arabs, and even made the Cossacks, and the Cossacks are so famous for their horsemanship, but the Caucasians, the Chechens, the Dagestanis, and Imam Shamil, they made the Cossack riders look inept by comparison. Trick riding, circus stuff, all of it in daily use in their violent warfare. Shamil was speaking to the people in a language they understood best when he flung himself into the saddle at one bound, cleared the high gates of the Aul in another, and scorning the path, leapt a precipice, hanging head downwards under his horse's belly, swinging up the other side to stand in the saddle, and at the gallop shot a coin high in the air. So my brothers and sisters, my point that I'm trying to make from all of this is how the likes of Shamil, and it's not restricted to Shamil. If we look to the Sahaba, if we look to the likes of Khalid bin Walid, yes, they were people of Iman. They were people who had the highest Iman, the strongest faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we forget and we overlook that they were also people who were extremely physically tough. And this physical strength and physical toughness is a virtue that has been all but lost to the Muslims. And there is no avoiding the fact that one of the greatest reasons for physical strength and toughness is jihad. And it's at this juncture that I am forced by the reality of the state of confusion prevalent in these times to reiterate that we as Muslims do not seek confrontation or desire to initiate hostilities. Despite the many virtues of jihad, we should not imagine that this means that we seek physical conflict, or that in desperation we can resort to means like terrorism that is so far removed from the nobility of this religion. We want and should desire to live a peaceful life on coexistence, but we have the right. We have the right, and no one can take this away from us, to defend ourselves individually and collectively against attack and aggression. We also have the right and duty to prepare ourselves against such attacks. The Quran teaches this. International law affirms this. Jihad is not something that we should be embarrassed about or made to feel embarrassed about. It is a noble principle in this religion that no reasonable person could disagree with. The Ghazwat and the Jihad of Imam Shamil was without doubt just and fair and right, as is, and I want to make this point, it is a struggle that the Chechens and the people of the Caucasus have been making against the Russians for 300 years. And it goes back to one of the reasons why I have chosen this great Imam to illustrate a very important lost virtue. One of the reasons goes back to what I was saying, because the propaganda of the Russians, and it's been picked up by many people in the West, is that the Chechens today are a bunch of terrorists. They've just, they're a bunch of bandits. But the Chechens have been fighting the Russians for over 300 years, almost continuously. I mean, there have been breaks in it, but on and off, they have been fighting the Russians for more or less 300 years. It is not a new struggle. And Imam Shamil was one of the longest fighting combatants against the Russians, Imperial Russia then. 25 years he fought the Russians for. And in the striving of this great Muslim personality, there is an example for us all. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.